the Nate KG podcast. I'm your host, Nate KG, and this is a show dedicated to exploring the nuances of jump rope, where I talk with jumpers of all skill levels, backgrounds, and fitness goals. Today, we're going to hear from my friend Francis Feraren. You can find him on Instagram at _SF_skips. Francis is a registered physical therapist and an avid recreational jumper. We originally connected on one of my live streams where Francis was sharing some thoughts on injuries, and I knew I wanted to bring that great information to the podcast. So that's exactly what we did. We discussed loads of different subjects, starting with healing from ankle sprains, flat-footedness, shin splints, and jumpers knee. Yes, we are covering some major territory on injuries in this podcast. We chat about how Francis structures his training sessions, what drives Francis to keep improving, learning patience from jump rope, and a bunch more. All the show notes for this episode can be found over at natekg.com. And if you're a returning listener, I'd really appreciate if you could leave a quick review for the show. It helps tremendously. Okay, we're ready to start now, so please enjoy this conversation with Francis Feraren. Francis, how's it going?
I'm doing fine. Thank you so much for having me on this podcast, Coach Nate. It's really an honor to be here.
Yeah. Absolutely. I'm very excited. We were you've been on a couple of the live sessions that I do each day called Caffeinated, and we've talked a bunch, and we connected there, and I thought that it'd be really fun to have you on because you were answering a question about ankle sprains, because you have a significant history and a profession in physical therapy. So I think a great place to begin before we get to the jump rope stuff would be yes. Would be to go into what led to becoming a physical therapist.
Okay. So physical therapy was actually more of supposedly a pre-medicine. I wanted to become a doctor, specifically a surgeon, but life had different plans for me. So you could ask me right now, why physical therapy? Why not nursing or medtech or pharmacy? Why did it have to be physical therapy? In my high school years, I was actually an athlete. I played volleyball. And an athlete who was really very accident prone and injury prone at that. I've experienced so much injuries. I've had a cyst on my left thumb. It's actually acting up now. That's why I couldn't do any power moves. This cyst was caused by an improper receive of a ball. I've injured both knees. So my left knee had suffered from an ACL tear. My right knee suffered from an ACL, a medial meniscus, and the medial collateral ligament tear.
Wow.
Yeah, so a lot of injuries. Thankfully, I haven't broken any bones, but one of the injuries that actually keeps on coming back, or it's really recurrent, is an ankle sprain. I've sprained my ankle half a dozen times already. And all of these injuries have been seen and treated by a physical therapist. So I really had a first-hand experience of what it felt like to be physically rehabilitated. And I think I was also able to see how fulfilling it was for the physical therapist to see my progress. I wanted to feel that as well, and that's why I got into physical therapy.
Gotcha. Okay. And so you going through it, you're like, this is, it's very impactful for you, and you saw how direct the impact could be on others.
Yes.
That's interesting. And so, man, like, because you were mentioning, in addition to being a physical therapist, you're also a lecturer. So how does that, what is that, and how does that complement being a physical therapist?
Well, with medicine in general, whether it be physical medicine and rehabilitation, with radiology, the learning really never stops. So since I am in the world of academia, I actually teach in a review center for those who want to take up the board exam for physical therapy. I actually have to update my knowledge every time because there are new things that come out every year, every month. One of the most recent ones that comes into mind, because I teach the lower extremity. So the hip region, the knee region, the ankle and foot, injuries associated with these regions, how to rehabilitate these regions. And one thing that comes into mind is, I'm sure you're familiar with the muscle quadriceps.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yes. there was this study which stated that it's actually now quintuceps.
Mm.
So
Wow.
there are five
Okay.
heads. Yeah. So I have to incorporate that into my discussions. And that's why it's more of like really learning every day, updating the information that I already have.
Gotcha. That's very interesting. I'd like for you to kind of paint a picture of the depth of your knowledge, because so for example, we were talking a little bit beforehand, but for example, like I'm a certified personal trainer, but there is a world of difference between my certification and your deep qualifications, right? And so I'd
Yes.
love to spend a little bit of time for you to kind of dig into a little. I mean, you can kind of go, I guess, as deep as you want, but like a little bit into like the more specifics about what you study and why your profession is so different than a certified personal trainer, or definitely than online fitness warriors. You know what I mean?
Yeah, 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 yeah. Okay. So what I think is the main difference is actually more of pre and post training, because personal trainers are there to make sure that you have the proper form, that you do the proper repetitions, that you actually are able to target certain muscle groups for your progress. Now, the difference will be in, if I get injured, what do I do? That's where physical therapy comes into play. So I'm not sure. I think personal trainers basically know the basics, like how to treat an acute injury, like police. That's what they call the acronym POLICE.
Yes, correct.
That's protect, optimal loading, icing, compress, and elevate. So that's the most basic thing that you could tell a person who has injured a certain structure in their body. But physical therapists are more in depth in the sense that we know what to give on the acute stage of the injury. And then as it transitions into the subacute stage, and of course into the chronic. So there are really very different exercises to give at these stages of the recovery of a patient. And that's the big difference between the physical therapist and a online or a coach.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. 100%. And and then it extends even farther when you talk about somebody who's read a few blog articles and then starts to discuss the correct things to do.
Yes, yes, that's very true.
Yes, exactly. Let's go into a few injuries. We were on a live. Somebody brought up ankle sprains. You've had many. You've had many different,
Half a dozen.
half a dozen. You've had many different injuries. Let's spend some time on this, because you are qualified to give legitimate advice and real information beyond just, like you said, policing. So let's start with an ankle sprain, and then we'll kind of move on to different things from there.
All right. So with an ankle sprain, the thing about the ankle is there is something called the proprioceptive center of the ankle. So proprioception in English means position sense. The reason why you're able to ascend and descend stairs without actually looking at the steps is because you are already aware of the position of your ankle. Like imagine if you were a kid and you go up the stairs, you'd see kids looking at the steps. It's because they're still not yet accustomed to what the position of their ankle should be in. But as they grow older, you would notice their confidence rising because they're no longer looking at the steps. And this is owing to the fact that their proprioceptors, their ankle proprioceptors, have already gotten used to going up these steps. In the event of an ankle sprain, it damages your proprioceptors. The sprain damages the proprioceptors and you lose all the position sense. So when you're walking, yeah, you've already recovered from the ankle sprain. There's no longer any pain, there's no longer any swelling, no limitation of motion. But whenever you're walking, whenever you're running, whenever you're jumping, your position sense isn't there. And what happens now is it places your ankle in a position that is possible to sprain, or rather, it places your ankle in a position wherein you can sprain it again. And that's why we have this thing called chronic or recurrent ankle sprains. Other people think that it's all right to strengthen. Yeah, I think those are really basic treatments for a ankle sprain. Strengthen the muscles that would prevent this. Stretch the muscles that would cause an ankle sprain. Ice, yeah. Optimally load, apply tape to prevent emotions from occurring. But the really important thing that you should introduce in the event that a recurrent ankle sprain is present is a proprioceptive exercise. And it's easy as going up the stairs, okay, like placing the middle of your foot on the step, okay, dropping the heel, okay, and then raising your heel again. So just do that 10 times a day. You are retraining the weight bearing or the proprioceptors of your ankle. Once you've gotten used to actually um, doing this exercise, you can do it with your eyes closed so that you're training your proprioceptors more. So that's the thing. You don't just strengthen, you don't just stretch, you don't just treat the present inflammation in your ankle. You have to treat the proprioception, the position sense of the ankle to prevent recurrent or chronic ankle sprains.
Mm-hmm. That's very interesting. And, that makes me think, especially especially in the last year with a lot of folks, a lot of practitioners, a lot of coaches, a lot of people in all forms of business moving to an online focused style of work. In your opinion, how much info are you able to deliver to someone,
Mm-hmm.
assuming that they've given you either a text description of their injury or like a photo or a video? What's the difference between a general average physical therapist's ability to give good information online that way versus in person?
Honestly speaking, it's really, really different. It's really difficult for me. I've had patients, I've seen patients through teletherapy, and it's really difficult to diagnose these patients or to give an impression as to their injuries. Because, example, let's say, and I've seen a lot of injuries as well in jumpers in the Philippines complain of knee pain. Now, as much as I want to help, the knee is a really very complex structure. So the pain could be coming from muscular, number one. It could be ligamentous. It could be meniscal. It could be actually the bones. It could be malalignment of. Actually, there's the thing called malalignment syndrome, wherein if you present with flat-footedness, it would affect the knee, it would affect the tibia, it would affect the femur, it would affect the hip. So just a problem with the foot will affect the whole lower extremity, and that's called malalignment. If you present with a problem with the knee, it could affect the hip, the ankle. And that's the big problem with having online consultations or online treatments. You're not really able to see the whole extent of the injury because you're not there to manipulate the knee. You're not there to manipulate the muscles and to see what is actually causing the problem of this patient. Yes, sometimes you are able to hit it and actually find out the problem, the diagnosis, the cause of the injury, but most of the time it's a hit or miss. That's the big problem right now with online consultations.
Gotcha. That makes sense. And I think that's a very important thing. I wanted to ask that specifically. I had a feeling that would be your answer, but I think it's, especially now, like there are so many folks who read an article or see a headline for a research study or listen to a podcast, and then they go and run around and say that headline over and over and over. Do this thing to fix your knee. Do this thing to fix your knee. But like you're saying, nothing is that simple. And
It's not that simple.
especially like as a coach, I get asked very frequently about injuries, and I'm like, well, the true answer is very unfortunate because you got to go see a practitioner, because
Exactly.
there's just so many things that not only am I not trained for, but I would have no way of knowing. even if online aside, like even if I was there with you in person, I wouldn't know. And I like to give some type of information, but I always make sure that it's very much, it's a sandwich that begins and ends, and in the middle has the go see a practitioner piece in there.
Yes. Yes.
I'd like to get into some shin splints, some discussions on shin splints, because
Yeah.
that is probably one of the biggest, if not the biggest, question around jump rope. And
Yes.
I'd like to go about it in a way where I'd like to give you my description, what I tend to tell people, and then I'd love for you to correct me or add to it or whatever you think is fit. And so when people ask me about shin splints, like I was just saying about other injuries, I always say, first you got to talk to a physician, because it could be more than just a standard shin splint. But assuming that that's the case, or assuming that the person is just not going to do that, and they want me to give them a quick answer anyway, I typically go with explaining that shin splints initially come from overuse and from doing too much too soon, typically. And so you're using this muscle, and from my understanding, the calf muscle is very unique, because I think with a lot of other, and again, feel free to correct me once I'm through this description, but to me, it seems like most muscles, when we fatigue, we can't really use them as much, but because the calf muscle is so effectively endurance based, because we're using it walking around all the time, we get these shin splints rather than complete failure. And so I think a lot of folks, you have that piece of overuse, but then you also have this element of a lot of people just do not stretch or do enough mobility. So you have this muscle that is already tight, but then if you are consistently jumping, you're also naturally strengthening it to some degree. And so now you're strengthening on top of that tension, which is increasing the force and the pain. That is typically what I recommend. And then I finish it by saying, again, go see a practitioner. But what are your thoughts on that?
First of all, I think your comment or your suggestion to go see a practitioner is actually on point, spot on. Mainly because, again, just because you're feeling pain on your shins doesn't mean it's already shin splints.
Gotcha.
You have to know exactly where shin splints would occur. And shin splints is also known as medial tibial stress syndrome. So the tibia is the larger bone of your leg. And if you actually touch the front part of your leg and slide it downward, you're going to feel a ridge, or you're going to feel a bony prominence. And this is where your tibia is. Now, if you notice, by moving, if you're touching your right tibia, your right leg, and you move to the right a little bit, you notice there's a muscle. Okay. This is actually where the muscles lie, not on the middle aspect of your tibia. So the difference actually here is.
Sorry, you're talking about the lateral.
The lateral aspect of the tibia is where the muscles lie. These are your pre-tibials. They're responsible for pulling your foot upward. The thing about medial tibial stress syndrome or shin splints, it's the bone that's actually experiencing the pain, not the muscle. So actually, the problem here is it's overuse. You're actually correct. It's overuse. You're probably jumping on solid concrete.
Yes. Yep. That's the one.
Concrete, which I've experienced as well when I was starting jump rope. It could actually be caused as well by improper shoes or padding in the shoe. Other people often tend to use skateboard shoes.
Yes.
I'm not gonna name names. Yes.
Yes. I mean, to be fair, I do it a lot if I'm doing, like, especially in the past when I was trying to take, more optimized Instagram posts, because it's fun, but then I don't do it a lot because it destroys my legs.
Yes, it will. So the padding of the shoes add to that. But it's okay with you because you jump on a mat. But that's another thing. If you don't jump with a mat, the bounding and the pressure absorption is actually placed more on the tibia. Okay, so if it's a muscular pain in nature, it should actually dissipate within a few days. And that's actually called your delayed onset of muscle soreness.
Yes.
Um, so it starts to flare up at around 24 hours after vigorous exercise. And then it starts to dissipate around 48 to 72 hours afterward. But shin splints would actually be continuous. It's a more of a continuous type of pain that you would notice if
Would you
walk. Yeah.
consider it chronic, or would that be what you said subacute at that point?
With shin splints, it's hard to tell
Gotcha.
because there are people who, despite their shin splints, would actually keep on jumping. And if they keep on jumping, it would turn into a more chronic or subacute condition. But generally, shin splints is actually more of just an acute, supposedly an acute condition. If you rest, um, if you take days off from jumping, if what do you call this, if you actually can recover from your condition, it's generally an acute condition. But if you're a very hard-headed person who
Yes.
would still want to jump, even if you are experiencing a pain on your shins, then this would actually progress into a subacute condition and eventually probably a chronic condition if you don't stop.
Gotcha. And so when it comes to that actual pain in the bone, what are we talking about with risk? I think, like you said, a lot of times it's assumed that it's a muscular thing, that it is, your calves are hurting, but on the side instead of the back.
Hmm.
but it
Yeah,
is, but it
it's
is
actually more
actually,
of a bone skeletal condition. It's not a musculotendinous junction. It's more of a skeletal condition, really. And the risk here with any overuse injury is actually a fracture.
yeah, okay. That's what I
Yeah, you
figured.
may have a stress fracture on your tibia, and that would be so much harder to treat since you couldn't bear weight on that leg. So, of course, walking would be out of the question, jumping as well. And it'll take 2, 3 months before you're able to really bear weight completely on this extremity. And the risk is really bigger if you continue jumping with your shin splints.
And so when it comes to how do you have any I guess firsthand or even secondhand data or information on how many people like the time period that it takes to go from shin splints and feeling them day after day or excessively or very frequently, and how long it takes to then experience some type of a stress fracture? Do you know, is there any information or data on that, or is that still kind of
It's
not
still
defined?
kind of blurry. It's
Okay.
not defined, mainly because there are also factors that could actually influence the presence of a fracture. Number one, yeah, you could be suffering from shin splints, but I'm not saying it's going to directly cause a stress fracture because number one, you could be very thin. Number two, you could be jumping just really an inch or two off the ground, but the place you're jumping on is concrete. So there are different factors that would cause a stress fracture. Mainly if you're taller, of course, because your body is much bigger. Of course, if you're bigger in the sense of width, okay, if you're more obese, the type of or the height of your jump could actually also cause a stress fracture. So the data when it comes to stress fracture is not really that well defined yet.
Okay. And then with youth, the last little point here on shin splints, when it comes to youth, because I think I know in the competitive jump rope world, it's very common to see youth getting shin splints primarily when it comes to like competition, right? So you go really hard for that day of competition, if it's like regional, or for several days in a row at like a national or world competition. Is the severity of that with youth the same as adults, or are there different things to consider? And I'm thinking about like growth plates and stuff in the
Yes,
legs.
actually, that's a really good question. Um, if you are younger and you suffer from shin splints, you're bones can actually adjust to it because we have this thing called Wolff's Law. So that's WOLFF. And it means that, well, it's actually more primarily used for fractures. However, you can apply it to musculotendinous junctions as well and skeletal junctions as well. The Wolff's Law states that your bones and any other part of your body will adjust to the pressure that you place on it. So the younger you are, and actually also the younger you are, the better you are adapting in terms of adapting to stresses. So if you're younger, you have shin splints, you recover much easily. You don't get any additional injuries aside from shin splints, considering that you rest. But when it comes to adults, because of their more fragile bones, it actually leads to more injuries than you would actually think.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think that if you are more on the older side, if you experience shin splints, treat it with ice. That's one thing I want to touch upon, if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely.
I see a lot of people applying liniments or warm compress to their shins whenever they suffer from shin splints. Please don't do that, because the medical term for shin splints is medial tibial periostitis, and the suffix itis means inflammation. So it's inflamed. You shouldn't heat up an inflamed structure because it will cause more damage than it's doing good. So the best thing to do when you suffer from shin splints is to apply ice. Salon pass, it's a very common thing here in the Philippines. It's a actually Bengay is another thing. Don't apply. Okay, don't apply if the pain is still there. You should just keep icing this to actually relieve yourself from the pain. And once the pain has dissipated, then you can apply the hot compress or the liniments that you want to.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. That is such great information. This is the kind of stuff that, like, it's nice to have somebody who is actually qualified to give this advice on the podcast to share that, because
Yeah.
like, you know, like as a personal trainer, you hear all these things and you hear a lot of information, but I'm always very hesitant because just because I've heard it or just because I've experienced it doesn't necessarily mean that correlates with the ultimate truth, or it does not correlate obviously with my legal or knowledgeable ability to actually provide that information based on my training, right? So this is really good. I'd love to go through just one more main subject, and then we'll move on to some more of your journey. I would love to touch on flat-footedness because I have been asked this several times, and it's usually in the context of, does flat-footedness affect jump rope, and how would you fix it? And I think that I'd like to reshape the questions I'm asked to be, how does being flat-footed affect bounding and jumping, and what are the ways people tend to adjust flat-footedness? I'm assuming it's a negative thing. It's a maladaptive way of the foot structure. I'm assuming. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
There are actually two causes of flat-footedness. It's either number one, it could be ligamentous in nature, or number two, it could be muscular. So we have this muscle called the tibialis posterior, and its primary action is to bring the foot downward or point your toes downward and bring the foot more inward. So that's plantar flexion and inversion. Now, if this muscle is weak, it's purely relying on the ligament to keep the arch of your foot. Okay. Now, if it's relying solely on the ligament, it places excessive stress on the ligament, stretching this ligament as well. When that happens, it leads to flat-footedness. So what you could actually do here is, of course, number one, it's basic. If the muscle is weak, the best thing to do is strengthen. So basically, all you have to do is place resistance towards the downward or the pointing downward of your foot, and place resistance towards the inward of your foot. That could strengthen your tibialis posterior. The problem will arise if it's purely the ligament that's the problem. Because there's no way to strengthen a ligament. It's non-contractile. Majority of the treatments that I see for a ligamentous problem is surgical correction, wherein they take the ligament, they place it farther so that it's stretched, and it actually makes it more taut. Problem with with surgical correction is it takes your activity away
Right.
for a period of time.
Right.
So other people rely on orthotic devices, anything to raise your medial longitudinal arch, your medial arch. You could find these in malls, like they're here in the Philippines. It's called BioFresh. It's anything just to raise that arch. Some shoes offer arch support. Those are also helpful. And to answer your question on how it affects jumping and how it affects the other structures of the knee, or rather other structures of the lower extremity. Number one, if you have flat-footedness, this stretches your plantar fascia. And when that happens, this leads to plantar fasciitis. So a lot of people are going to complain of pain on the soles of their feet, which are very painful in the morning. And as you progress through the day, it starts to dissipate. So that's definitely plantar fasciitis. Another problem that could arise from flat-footedness is, again, what I said, malalignment of the lower extremity. So your knees are going to get injured as well. So you could be suffering from ACL tears. Yes, flat-footedness can cause ACL tears. You could have what we call jumper's knee, which is also a very common injury in the world of jumpers, as the name would suggest, jumper's knee. It's very weird how a foot problem, a flat-footedness, could actually cause a problem with the knee. But since they're not really that close to each other, but they're connected to each other because of the joints of your body. So since your flat-footedness, your tibia will be excessively pulled medially, and then your knees are gonna have, since it's malaligned, there's no connection, there's no proper connection between the two structures. It places stress on the patellar ligament, which causes jumper's knee. So there are a lot of problems arising from flat-footedness. It's not just about the bounding. It's not just about it's going to affect your bounding because it's going to, of course, cause pain to your plantar fascia. But yeah, a lot of problems could arise from flat-footedness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think I mean, what a way to start the podcast. I mean, this is the information that I know people really, really want to know. And it's great to hear it broken down, based on science and from a clinical perspective, Yes. And you can obviously do many Google searches about these things, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to arrive at something correct,
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So this is already really good. Let's dig into more of your specific journey with jump rope. So when did you first pick up a jump rope and why?
Oh, when did I first pick up? Well, I've known about jump rope since the early 2000s.
Gotcha.
But I really tried first when I got into boxing in April of 2011, because I was just fresh out of high school, and I gained so much weight in that summer because I was so stressed about entering physical therapy, and I wanted to try something new. So I got into boxing, and as we all know, boxing usually starts with a warm-up of jump rope. However, the boxing stint was really short-lived, and so was the jump rope.
Why is that?
I think I attended 5 sessions, but then I got stressed out from all my superiors, all my friends who've gone into physical therapy school, telling me to learn your anatomy by now, learn your physiology by now. So I went away from boxing. I stopped boxing, and I focused on academics. The next time I started jumping rope was, I think majority of all the Filipino jumpers can agree with me, is during the pandemic. I saw this friend jumping rope. I actually saw his picture, a before and after picture, few months in between. And he lost a couple of inches off his waist. His face looked so much slimmer. And in his caption it stated, "Thank you, jump rope." So that's when I thought, okay, because of course it was the pandemic, all the gyms were closed. Sporting events weren't allowed here in the Philippines, so I couldn't play volleyball, couldn't even go out to jog or anything. So I thought, oh, maybe I could try jump rope. So I messaged him, I asked him what rope he used. He told me a rope, and I purchased it online. But it didn't come immediately, because mainly because, of course, the pandemic. So
Gotcha.
all shippings were delayed.
Yeah.
My sister, who's actually more of a bigger boxer, she continued the boxing in 2011. So she had this rope, but it was the very cheap, flimsy rope that you would normally find in gyms. I tried it because she had this rope for a while. She wasn't using it since she was the one getting ready for her internship. She's a speech and language pathologist. And I tried it on. I tried it out rather. And
Hey, I think trying
I
it
was
on
enjoying
fits. I think that's correct. I think you look at jump rope size, you got to try it on for size, you know?
yeah, that's correct. Yeah, thank you for that. Okay, so um, I tried it out. I tried it on first, so I measured it properly, and then I tried it out. Yeah, and that's how my journey started. But it's been actually on and off. In that, I think I started mid June of 2020. But because I didn't have access to the right rope, I didn't have the proper place to jump. I didn't have a big enough space to really jump and perform tricks. It was on and off until around November of 2020. On my birthday, when I got my first beaded rope, because I saw your tutorial on the Mic release.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah, it's the trick that I've been wanting to learn since I started looking up tutorials on Facebook. So I was flabbergasted, so to speak, about rather I was really really amazed by the Mic release. So I bought the beaded rope, and in November of 2020, well, December already, that's when my journey really started, and I was more of actively jumping rope every day.
That's really cool. So you are really fresh to it.
Really,
That's
yes.
awesome.
Really
So
much.
what's your journey like? What have you been doing so far? What are your sessions looking like? How are you structuring them?
Well, if we're talking about structure, it's more of just really trying to unlock tricks every day.
Gotcha.
And well, I started with in November 30, 2020, I got my first beaded rope. I could do normal jumps, so basic jumps, crosses, um, double unders. I could do turns, 360s, but I really wasn't veering into the freestyle jump rope yet.
Mm-hmm.
But when I got that beaded rope, that's that same day I actually unlocked the Mic release
Oh
with that.
wow.
Yeah,
That's
because
that's
I've been
fast.
I've been trying to no, I've been trying to learn the Mic release because, like I said before, I suffered from Shin splints a lot as well, because there were times that I jumped for 5 days in a row without any rest.
Wow.
And
So
yeah,
real
so I
quick, just to pause
Mhm,
there. So you
mhm.
you know what shin splints are. You're aware of all of the details. So how did you still get shin splints? You just were like, whatever, I'm just gonna power through it. I want to jump.
My weight my weight
Gotcha.
was the problem. Um, Prior to the pandemic, I was actually visiting the gym every day.
Uh-huh.
So I had this structure, I had this program that I followed. I wasn't lifting weights at all. I was focusing on cardio, because cardio would actually help you lose weight. I wasn't focusing on bulking up.
Mm-hmm.
But when the pandemic started and all the gyms closed down, and there was nothing to do at home but eat and watch and binge
Yep.
Netflix, I think I gained 30 to 40 pounds.
Yeah. I
So
think a
it
lot
was
of
my
folks have
weight.
probably felt very similar to that.
Yeah.
It's
So
it's it's so frustrating because you work so hard and
mm,
you lose the muscle that you had, and then you pack
Yes.
on top of that, and it's like, oh man.
It's so annoying.
Yeah.
It could have been prevented, but yeah, let's not dive into that because it will cost so much. Yeah, yeah. Let's just
Yeah.
erase that from.
Let's
Yeah,
forget
but
that ever
yeah,
happened.
yeah, yeah. So, it was my weight that actually caused shin splints, and initially I was resting. I was resting my knee. I was resting my shins. I was also resting my knees because they were starting to hurt as well. But there were days that I'd power through, hoping that, or maybe I hope I can endure this and actually build the endurance of my shins. Because like what I said, Wolff's law, your body will adapt to the pressures placed upon it. So I hope that with my continuous jumping, I'd actually be able to endure the pain and eventually my tibias would become better. That's not what happened. So there was this time that I wanted to search for something that I can do with my rope, just remain active, active rest days.
Hmm.
And I saw your tutorial in the McRelease. So I
Hmm.
didn't have the beaded rope yet. I was still using this cheap rope that
Hmm.
I got from my sister, and
Hmm.
still my the jump rope that I ordered still hasn't arrived yet. So I couldn't,
Oh,
for the life of me,
you.
understand the McRelease.
Oh, so it literally took months for you to get the rope you ordered?
Yeah,
Oh, that's frustrating, man.
yeah. It took months.
It's nice that you're a polite person. Otherwise, that'd be very easy for you to throw down on that.
Of course, you think I'm a polite person, but if you check my emails, you wouldn't think I'm polite.
I
Yeah,
love
yeah.
it.
No,
I love
no.
it.
I wasn't cursing at the person, but of course I wanted to withdraw
Yeah.
my order because it was taking months, and they
Right.
said it's already been shipped. The problem is it's being held by customs because this was the time that people from China were shipping medications to the Philippines saying that it would stop COVID. Yeah, so they were
Oh,
holding the items, they were holding the packages there,
gotcha.
so that customs could actually check if these were medications. So that's what held up the rope in the customs warehouse. Um, so yeah, I was doing the MIC release with my licorice, and it's not a licorice rope actually. It's a PVC rope, but it's probably what 2-3 millimeters in diameter.
Gotcha.
So
Okay.
you couldn't get the revolutions properly,
Yeah.
and I was frustrated. I was definitely frustrated during that time. I couldn't get it properly. I was wondering, how do I do this? How do I get it to rotate properly? I've been trying that on the floor with one handle, and then you just turn it into a spiral and a U shape, and then bring it to your side. So I was trying that. I still couldn't do that. So I stopped for 2 months after that because of my frustrations with the McVitie's. And in November of 2020, yeah, that same day that I got the rope, I think what made it easier for me to unlock the McVitie's was actually doing the drills beforehand with the licorice rope or with the PVC rope. So when I got that beaded rope and I realized that okay, so it's basically the same, and I could feel the rope more,
Hmm.
I unlocked the McVitie's that same day.
Yeah. Yeah. That having the right rope is so important. Like, this is why I recommend that short handle beaded rope so much, is because,
Yeah.
like, I mean, yes, you're going to have a harder time learning some of the crosses just because you can't go that far, but it's actually a good thing because it forces your body to hit the right positions. And there are obviously there are drawbacks to a short handle beaded rope. Like, if you get into doing triples or quads or quints or like very hard strength skills, yes, it's going to be more difficult. But for the majority of people, all the way up into like like a high intermediate level, it satisfies all the requirements. So
Yes, yeah.
I'm really glad to hear that was such an immediate unlock for you once you made that
Yeah.
switch.
That was the story of the Mick release, and the Mamba is the same thing. Basically, the next day, no, not the next day, 2 days later. So I unlocked the Mick release, of course, with the help of other Filipino jumpers such as Rob Laiko, aka Skip Sahoy. He's been very helpful because I was watching your tutorial, I watched it once and I thought that I could get it in one try, but apparently not. So
Yeah.
that's just me. That's just me thinking I could. So I asked help from different Filipino jumpers, and Rob was actually helpful enough to tell me, okay, so your body is excessively rotating to the left. Your arm is excessively outward. So with his help, I was able to unlock it that same day. And then he gave me some drills to do. So toe catches instead of side swings. And then a few days later, I saw again your tutorial on the Mamba. So the Mamba was actually the trick that I wanted to try because I've been on TikTok since the start of the pandemic, and I think you know who I'm going to pertain to when we talk about TikTok. I saw Jimmy.
Yes. The
I saw
man, the
Jimmy.
myth, the legend,
Yes,
Jimmy.
Jimmy. So Jimmy was doing this Mamba release, and I thought, well, if I could do this, I would be wowing so much people. So I opened your tutorial, I watched it, and I had everything in place. The release, the figure of eight, the backhand um, rotation. The problem was actually being able to catch the rope. So I couldn't for the life of me catch that mamba.
Hmm.
So
It was it going too fast?
it was going too fast,
Yeah.
yes. It
Yeah.
was going too fast. It was going too ballistic.
Yes.
So I told myself, okay, so let's rest. Maybe I'll try it tomorrow. And then I was trying to figure out what I could do to actually unlock the trick. So I told myself, okay, if you think about it, it's basically just a conventional mic release. It's nothing different. It's just side to side. It came from the right, left, it came to the right, went back to the left. How do I catch a conventional mic? So then I said, what is the difference between a conventional mic and the Mamba? Number one, it's more ballistic because you really have to throw that rope to fling that rope around. And number two, it's much faster. So if I slow it down, will I be able to catch it? It was 11:13 at night. I still remember
You
because
know
I
the
checked
exact
my
time.
watch. Yes, I checked my watch. So I checked, and then I said people are already asleep, but I really want to try this out. I think other people are really like that. I really want to try this out. So I went out, I got my rope. On the second try, I got the Mamba. It was just the basic left, right, left, but I still got Mamba. So I think one point that we can get here is actually really just dividing the rope into skills, trying to understand how different this is from a skill of almost the same caliber. And once you realize the difference, apply those differences to the skill, you should get it in no time.
Yeah, and I think you're naturally more predisposed to this idea of like mechanics and physics, right? Just because of your
Yes.
studies. I mean, that's
Yes.
everything you do. And it's very similar with personal training, although I would say that my predisposition towards biomechanics and physics is more from when I was a gymnastics coach, because that sport is all about how to move the body correctly, you know?
Yes.
And then
Yes.
other things on top of that, of course, but primarily that. And I think that makes a lot of sense that you would break it down into pieces like that 100%. You know, you mentioned that you mentioned that you're picking this rope up at 11 o'clock at night because
Yeah.
you've got the bug. Like you're thinking about it, and it sounds like it's like low key an obsession.
It
I'm
actually is.
Yeah, and I'm curious, have you felt that with other sports, with other activities or hobbies, or is it unique, or like where do you think that comes from for you?
Um, I've actually felt this before with volleyball. Because yeah, volleyball wasn't my first sport. My first sport was actually tennis. Um, I was
Ah,
born
another
in
tennis player. Yes, that's
yes, another tennis players.
tennis was my first sport too.
Yeah, so was LA's and Irvin's.
Yes, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So yeah, tennis was my first sport. I was born into a family of tennis players.
That's cool.
My grandparents were both tennis players. All their five children were tennis players. My dad taught my mom how to play tennis when they started dating, and my sister and I also, of course, learned how to play tennis. But I really didn't get into competitive tennis. I could hold a rally, no problem, but I didn't get into that competitive side of tennis. Now with volleyball, it became a different thing. It was an obsession with volleyball to the point that I've had a classmate tell me, "You're still talking about volleyball?" He literally asked me that question because it was an obsession. I'd watch videos on YouTube of different players from around the world. I tried to mimic their forms. I've tried to mimic how they approach certain balls. It became an obsession. It was a healthy obsession, of course, since I was losing weight at the same time, and of course I was building character as an athlete. So I've felt the obsession before, but I think this is a different obsession because with volleyball, it's pretty difficult to play by yourself.
Yes.
I play
Yeah.
with a wall. I played with a wall. I've played with just basically the air, just volleying the ball. But with jump rope, it's pretty different since you're alone with your jump rope. You just need a rope. You just need a mat. You could actually don't even need a mat. Um, yeah, so it's a different obsession in itself. But I think it's still a healthy obsession since it hasn't really affected um, my being a person. It hasn't affected anything else.
I feel
Yeah.
like, to me, like, I used to say that I like was addicted to jump rope, but I feel like I've switched the term of addiction to obsession, because to me obsession feels like a little bit like, it feels more like you're saying there's not negative ramifications, whereas addiction
Yes.
tends to have those negative
A negative
ramifications.
perception to it. Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's just the true.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense that you would what is it that draws you to these things? If I had to guess, it sounds like you're very into details and really understanding how things work. And it
Mm-hmm.
sounds like both volleyball and jump rope have a lot of nuance to them. Is that
Yes.
what drew you to? Are there other things? I'm kind of curious what that was.
Well, to be quite honest, what drives me to become better at my craft is actually more to not to impress other people, but it's more of actually to influence other people. I've had a few former teammates approach me and tell me, "What rope do you use? What do you think I should start with? What tricks do you think that I should be able to learn at this very early stage of my jump rope career?" And it makes me feel good when people come to me because I literally just started 4 or 5 months ago. Like literally, the obsession, as you would call it, just started 5 months ago, and people are coming to me to to ask for help, and that really boosts my self esteem. I would think, and yeah, it helps, and I'm not only helping myself because I think when you teach other people, the information that you share to them actually stays with you, and when it stays with you, you're actually able to apply it as well to your practices. So not only are you helping yourself, but you're also helping other people become better versions of who they are. So that's what really gets me obsessed to honing my skills and to actually make my craft better.
And sometimes, like, you have to relearn things you already know too. Like, that happens
Yeah,
to me a lot. Like, especially when
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
when I'm coaching folks in jump rope. Like, a lot of I'm obviously telling them something because I'm a coach. I understand that works, but sometimes when it comes to, like, I honestly do not believe that anybody can truly coach themselves. I think that some athletes have had such great coaching in the past that they can continue the things that they've done, but I really don't believe that you can coach yourself. And this is kind of one of those examples. And like, recently I did a live on Instagram with Tan Nim, and we were talking about we talked about a lot of stuff, but like specifically the Sunny D that I was doing live. And I was explaining to him the difference between, like, when it comes to some high level strength jump rope skills, there's a huge difference between putting in 90% effort and
Mhm, yeah, yeah, yeah.
97% effort and
Yes,
100%
actually went
effort.
from 93 to 97. I
Yeah.
remember that.
Yeah. And it's really, and it's one of those things, like, I know, but when you actually go train, like, and the great example is what we talked about was the kip whip jump rope skill, where you're going to push up, you do kind of a front roll, but you land on your shoulders and you kick up to your feet and pull the rope underneath. I've never landed that skill before. And after we finished up, I thought it would be fun to make a post of me failing on that skill
Yeah.
because like you don't see fails a lot. And then Tam was asking if there are skills that I don't know how to do, and it's like, of course there are. You never stop learning. It was just one of those moments where as I was training it, I was taking my own advice that I had just given Tam that I've obviously known about for a very, very long time, but I was just effectively relearning and reapplying it again. And I think you're totally right about that. Do you consider yourself, this is really interesting because like, I'll ask the question first. Do you consider yourself more of a practitioner, more of a clinician, and someone who focuses more on the science and the mechanics and the technique? Or do you consider yourself more of a coach and an educator?
That's a really good question. Uh, I find myself right now, if you're going to ask me right now, um, I think I find myself more of a coach, an educator, because I like studying the theories more than applying it. I think that's obvious with how I unlocked the Mamba. I studied the theory of how to learn the Mamba first, and then the application came, and it was much easier to do because I had my theoretical in check. I think that also applies to my practice of being a physical therapist. I have to learn the theory of how, let's say, example, a stroke occurs. In theory, what parts of the brain are affected, uh, what functions of this part of the brain are able to, what the functions of this part of the brain are. And of course, if you have an affectation of this part of the brain, then these functions can no longer be performed. So it's theory. In theory, you study first in theory, and then when you see it on a patient, you're able to apply it. So I like the theory more than the practical side of things.
Gotcha. So that you can then use it for coaching purposes.
Yes.
Gotcha. That's so. Which one do you find easier to do, or which one can you get more lost in or slip into a flow state more easily? Spending hours researching and reading and learning, or spending hours with clients in person helping them with things? Is clients slash
Patient.
class, like when
Class. Oh,
when
yeah,
you're
yeah, yeah.
lecturing, you know what I mean? I would lump those into the same category, even though they're wildly different in execution.
Yeah.
I think that the intention is very, very close, right? Because you're educating, you're
Yeah,
coaching.
yeah, yeah. Um, I think I'd spend more time reading and researching, more than the application. Because the thing about teaching someone is the level of knowledge of every person is different. So some people can understand the concept if you explain it to them one time. Others um, you have to use different ways, different means to make them understand it. So what I like doing is I have to first understand the concept, how it's taught. So um, what are the prerequisites? What is the main concept that you want to learn about? And then once I'm done with how it's taught, I have to also teach myself how I want to teach it,
Yes,
or how
the
to
meta
make
learning
other
piece
people,
of it.
yeah, yeah, like how to make someone who doesn't really understand it, right? So it's more of spending time making it basic for other people, and that's why I spend more time with research, with reading, than the actual application of it, or the actual practice of it.
Yeah, this. I mean, there's literally nothing for me to add because you couldn't have summarized it any better. Like I really feel what you're saying, and one of the one of the banes of my existence as a coach, and I'm sure there's many parallels in physical therapy, is, you know, there's a lot of folks online that they give you the quick fix or the drill or the coaching tip in quotes that looks sexy online, but like there's nothing about it that like like my biggest thing is like penguin taps as a drill do
Mhm.
nothing to help you learn a double under.
A
And
double
it's like,
enter. Yes, that's so true.
you know, and it's like, but it's like but when I say penguin taps, almost every single
Everyone knows
person
it.
knows exactly what I'm talking about. And it's one of the big, it's one of those things where like, listen, I don't expect the world to spend the time to become a good coach, but like as a coach is like, man, there is such a wild difference between someone who is, self-proclaimed internet expert and someone who truly understands the craft of educating and coaching, which you clearly do. And it's funny because people have mentioned to me, who have taken my jump rope flow and grind course that's more intermediate, and there is jump rope theory in there, and they've asked or like they said, why don't you have like a certification at the end of it, like people should take this and then be able to go coach, and the answer is no, because at no part of that course, while it is an overwhelming amount of information and it's phenomenal, people leave that course with a completely different view on jump rope. It's not a coaching course. There's nothing in it that, I mean, yes, you could take the information that I give you and you could restate it, right? But that's not the same as being able to package things up and explain it real time to someone or help them progress,
Yeah, that's true.
Even though it's only been, actually not in quotes, it has only been a few months of jumping, right? Like you're still very fresh. Do you feel like you've learned anything from jumping rope?
Oh, yeah, definitely. When it comes to jumping rope, I think that the first thing that I've learned is, since I lack patience and I easily get frustrated, um, jump rope taught me that I can't speed through all of the processes and be good at a certain skill in just a few minutes. It takes hours, sometimes even days, to maybe just unlock a skill, and that's just the unlock. You still have to clean it up. So that's one thing. Patience, and really just don't quicken or don't hasten things just because you want to be able to unlock it today. You have to learn how to get into the skill first, or what are the biomechanics needed to get the skill in check, and then eventually everything will follow. Another thing that I learned from jump rope and from your recent YouTube post is, do not compare yourself to others.
Yeah, that's a big one.
We all work at a different pace. Others have more time to practice than you do. Others only have 1 day a week to work on their craft, and aside from that, we all have different skill sets. Others are amazing at power moves. Others are amazing at multiples. Others at leg and ground crosses. Others at releases. So it's not, you shouldn't compare yourself to this person because he can do multiples. Because there's something that this person can do that you can't. Rather, the other way around. There's something that you can do that this person can't. And that's something that you should work on, instead of trying to compare yourself to that person.
Yeah. And how irrelevant the time is to all of it too.
Yes,
I think exactly. It's one of the common things, and in my mind, there's no reason to feel shameful about it at all. It's a very, very natural thing, but there's no reason for you to look down on your own skills or to be frustrated with your own skills just because someone else is farther ahead. And I think you're obviously 100% right about different amounts of times with training different skills, but there's also differences in resources available, aka
yes, that is true.
That can be physical resources like where you jump, what types of ropes you have, but it can also be knowledge resources. And one of the things about the internet is it's very easy to not necessarily show all of the resources that you have. Not that you need to, but in any industry, forget jump rope, just anything, but especially in fitness, but anywhere, there are people who learn from people who really know what they're talking about and then never make it clear that they've learned the top information, right?
Yes.
Which is very weird, right? Because like talking with you right now, you're a physical therapist. You are proud of where you were educated from. You are proud of the fact that you had, I'm sure, many, many professors and many different people that you've learned from, and you would gladly cite them, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And then it's very interesting in certain industries, the fitness industry being one of them, people somehow think the reverse, that by noting who you've learned from, that it diminishes credibility, but it does not. So I think that in terms of the comparison, it's worth just keeping in mind too, whether malicious or non-malicious intent. A lot of times, like, we just really don't know the full extent of somebody's knowledge. You know what I mean?
Yes, that's true. Yeah.
So yeah, that's a great point to bring up. That learning about that piece is so critical. Man, this has been a really good podcast. That hour flew by.
Oh, it's been an hour?
It's been an hour.
What? Yeah, I didn't notice. Whoa.
Yeah, it's been an hour. That is, we've really covered a lot of good information, and I'm so glad that you were down to be on the show, because the information you provide about injuries, I think, it's absolutely critical, and it's going to be invaluable for people who listen, because despite the nature of blog posts and quick social media and all these different things, the true answers to these topics of injury are not short, they're not quick, and they're not simple. And I think it's really great that you've shared some wealth of knowledge with everyone today. And I think now would be a good time to kind of wrap up to the main question of the podcast, which is, what is jump rope to you?
Jump rope to me, well, if you would ask me in 2020, I would have probably told you that jump rope is a warm-up. It's a warm-up for a bigger and more explosive type of exercise or activity. It's a way of losing weight, as other way people look at it. But if you ask 2021 me what jump rope is, I would tell you that it's a lifestyle. It's something that we should apply to our daily practices, most especially when trying to learn certain skills. Break it down, try to understand how to get better at each and every broken down skill before you combine them and get that skill in check. So you can apply that in life as well. You try learning different aspects before you combine these aspects and actually learn how life is. Life has ups and downs, so does jump rope. You'll get frustrated sometimes with jump rope. You'll get frustrated sometimes in life. So what you learn with jump rope, you can also apply in life.
I love that, man. It's so awesome that you have that perspective, and that I feel like you're really in a good spot, especially this early in your jump rope journey, and I'm really excited to see everything that you do moving forward. I think that it's going to be it's going to be so good. So good. I appreciate you taking the time. I definitely want to let you obviously get back to the rest of your day, but Francis, thank you again for being on.
Thank you so much, Coach Nate. It was an honor.
What up? It's Nate. I'm back again real quick before you head out. How'd you like the podcast? Francis was a really fun guest to have on, and I'm glad that we could discuss some real professional injury advice that I know so many of you can probably use. Thanks for taking the time to hang with us and listen to the podcast. It really does mean a lot to me that you actually spend time out of your day to tune into this show. And if you know anyone who might be interested in some of the stuff we talked about today, please send them the link to this episode. It really does help a ton to get the word out there about jump rope and to help people learn about our community. And if you're as obsessed as Francis is about jump rope and you really want as much jump rope info as possible, check out natekg.com/new. That's NEW. That's a page on my website with links to all of my new stuff that comes out, YouTube tutorials, more podcasts, Instagram combos, coaching, a link to sign up to my email newsletter, all of the things I have going on to make your jump rope journey better. So definitely check that out. All right, that is it for now. I'm going to go back to editing some more podcasts. Have a great rest of your day, morning, evening, whatever time it is for you right now. See you later.